welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. This week, I'm really excited to be talking with Erhard Vogel about his book, A Dialogue with Death, The Teacher of Life, an Ancient Story for the Modern World. This topic of everything Erhard and I are going to talk about today, we're talking briefly before the show. I say this almost every week on this show about offering different perspectives, offering different ideas, offering different solutions. I don't come into this show, well, it's not my intention anyway, to come into the show talking at everyone. I want to come to the show with information that is helps find solutions, and then those solutions leading you to the right action. So Erhard and I, just briefly from our intro conversation, I know this is going to be an exciting and lively conversation this week. So let me tell you a little bit more about Erhard, and then we'll get started. Erhard Vogel is recognized as one of the foremost meditation and self-realization teachers in the world. Born in war-torn Germany, Dr. Vogel immigrated to the United States at age 14. He graduated from the Pratt Institute of Design in New York, and at an early age rose to a respected position in a world-renowned architectural firm. At 31, he set aside a brilliant career in architecture to devote himself to the service of humanity. For 4 years, Erhard traveled the globe on foot, researching the ways in which people of different cultures seek fulfillment. He saw the underlying need in everyone to fulfill their potential. In India, Erhard met two of the world's most renowned luminous masters who welcomed him into their midst and invited him to teach among the Himalayan sages, a rare distinction for a Westerner. He lived for an extended period of time in a Himalayan cave in a remote sacred area. After that, Erhard returned home to address the problems and aspirations of our contemporary society with his teachings. Following this, Erhard founded the Nataraja Yoga Ashram, a not-for-profit organization in San Diego. Erhard's teachings are a unique combination of time-tested wisdom and pragmatic method. His fundamental experiential and systematic approach is based upon sound psychological, physiological, and spiritual principles that make meditation and self-realization practical and attainable. Since 1969, Erhard has taught tens of thousands of students throughout the world. He continues to travel regularly to India and teach among the sages in the Himalayas, where he is recognized as a master teacher. He has authored 4 books, as well as numerous audio recordings of guided meditations and teachings. Erhard currently offers courses on-site and online through the Nataraja Meditation and Yoga Center in San Diego, California. Erhard, I am so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Sloane. I really look forward to this conversation because
yes.
I like the premise from which you come.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So I know, I told the audience about you, and I always like to ask you, in your words, who is Erhard Vogel?
I am the being that we all share.
Mm-hmm.
So, by the way, the things that I talk about are fundamentally very simple, but they're somewhat different from what most of us are accustomed to.
Right.
And I'd like to invite everyone to not merely listen, but participate in the experience of what we're talking about. Because only through experiencing something can you say, I know that. So if you just listen to me with your mind and just believe what I'm saying, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
I say to my students always, don't you ever believe a word that I say. You need to know. And
Right.
that's by experiencing.
Right. So how can someone participate in the experience then? Because that's a different way to think about it. And even for me, how can someone participate?
Point. We need to be present. That means our mind has to be with us. Like there's somebody in there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That one, that the being that we really are. Our mind has to be present for that, not out in, what I'm going to do later, or what she said to me, or this and that and this. The mind just flips around all over the place, and often we are absent-minded, which means we're not present to ourselves. So the mind has to be present, it needs to be relaxed, and needs to be still. And that's easy. You can just, with one breath, get the mind to be with you, and you cause it, you tell it to be still.
Right.
And and just trust in being there for you and with you, and then absorb and reflect. The mind is like a mirror. It's a reflector that brings to us, to our consciousness, whatever we are experiencing.
Right.
If the mind is not bringing the reflection of what we're experiencing to us, it's giving it to all of the other extraneous, distractive stuff.
Right.
And where are we left then? We're left out.
And often I think we don't think we have control over that, right? We think we have to be here and there, and but we
Right.
just as you're saying, it's not a complicated thing to bring it all back home.
Right. There are specific techniques that you can learn that make it happen. You're making a very important point here. It doesn't happen by itself. It doesn't happen by my just saying, "Oh, mind, be still." Mind will give you all kinds of trouble if you're saying that to your mind. Yeah.
Right.
But you need to know how to focus the mind.
Right.
So to be in a state of being focused and present to yourself with continuity and without distortion and distraction, that's the state we want. That is the state of being spontaneously present to ourselves. But it has to be the real self, not the fantasy self or the I ought to be self or the I don't know who that is self. Also, it has to be the real self. Now, that can be learned through experience, how to do that and how to get to know the real self. It can be learned. And then what we're talking about, you experience, everything that we're talking about is about you. It's about the very essence of you. So you can experience, you can trust, you have the ability to experience that. And then just relax and enjoy flowing with the experience.
And see what comes up with that too, right? When we're
Yes.
open and free like that, we're able to hear more what's going on inside of us, right? We're able to recognize, we can feel into that rather than being in this reactive state of going here, then going there, like the mind, like you're saying, going
Or
all over the
making
place.
constant arguments to whatever is said.
Right. Oh yeah, yeah.
So what you're saying is very true. What we're talking about will resound within you.
Right.
Well, this is true.
Yes, you'll know that you're feeling.
When I say to you right now, you are right now. You are being right now. That's not complicated, is it?
Right.
It's true.
Right.
It's self-evident. I can know through my own experience that I am.
And so to go back to the question I asked you, who is Erhard Vogel? And your answer was
that I am. That doesn't explain it yet, but it's the true answer.
Right. And that, that's the simple answer too, right? Because anybody else that, that I've asked that question to, we go through, I am the teacher, I am the, the mom, I am the, whatever it is.
Blonde, I'm rich, I'm poor, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm depressed. All those modifiers. They're not really what you are. They are something you put on top of that.
Right.
What you are is the being that you are, that pure energy of being that you are, without having all that other stuff attached to it. Right. And when you get in touch with that being that you are, then you have a powerful central, like a touchstone, right?
Right.
And everything is then related to the being that you are, thus to the real you. The being that you are is the real you, not the false you, the fake you. Like I said, the I ought to be, and so on.
Right. And when I was reading your website and in the book, and just your story about traveling the world and researching, and doing this on foot, and being invited into these different groups that are, isn't necessarily common. What was the catalyst for this? How did you get started on this journey? And how, again, I feel like these are all such big questions, but I'm really interested in this and how this got started for you.
how do I give you an hour answer in few
in,
moments?
in 5 minutes, yeah, right.
I
Um,
got I got really started on honing in about what I consider the most important thing is to have a relationship with the real being that I am
mhm.
when I was 5.5 years old.
Wow.
And that was weird in some ways because, well, that doesn't usually happen with people.
Right. Right.
But as you mentioned in the intro, I grew up in war-torn Germany, and we had gone through months and months of bombardments where the skies were just gray with planes dropping
Mhm.
bombs, and we hid out in the forests, and when they came strafing us there, we dug holes in the ground and put branches over them, hid out there, and then we that didn't work, and then we went back into our homes, which also didn't work because they would collapse upon us. you
Mm.
know but so at this instant we were in our home, and when the alarm sounded we ran into the cellar, which was fortunately of a 16th century Capuchin monastery building that we lived in. It wasn't
Okay.
a monastery anymore. And so that's where our home was. We ran down in the cellar, and the bombs were getting closer and closer. Then the house right next to us got hit, and we knew we were going to be next.
Mm-hmm.
So we stood pressed, my family pressed under a stone arch, and there was panic, and there was crying and screaming and so on. And there was a room next to us. There were like 10 people sitting on benches and wailing and crying and so
Yeah.
on.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And as a 5.5-year-old boy, I did not want the panic to take me over because I felt it how it wanted to rise from my stomach and my heart.
Yes.
And I didn't want that to take over. I decided that I wanted to be completely present when death hit. Which
At
I,
5 years old. Oh my gosh.
yeah, it's kind of weird. I thought about this afterwards, but more because I had seen, bodies plastered against walls from the impact of bombs and so on as a
Yeah.
little boy. So I wanted to be completely present when death hit so that I could experience myself in this state as that boy and whatever came next. I didn't have any idea, but there was, of course, the assumption that something would continue with me in whatever came next. Where,
Interesting.
where that came from, I still don't, I
Right.
cannot explain it, but that's what happened. And so I made myself be stone cold, clear, present, like I was mentioning before,
Yeah.
present. And I wasn't involved in the panic. I wasn't involved in anything except readiness to go into the next realm. And then the bomb hit and the lights came on from the bomb, but also from having been so extremely purely focused, the inner light came on. And the inner light was, I was so involved in it, I did not label it or speak it
Right.
to myself or so, but it was just there. Then we survived. And the people in the 10, 12 people in the room next to us were all dead.
Mm.
So then we came upstairs and our house was destroyed. The bomb had hit it. And at least one half of it was the
Mm-hmm.
roof, and then our upper rooms and so on were all destroyed. We came outside and I was like surreal, it was almost like
Yeah.
floating, like I wasn't in the common world experience yet.
Right.
But I noticed, oh, there's a bird in the tree, and the tree is like empty of leaves. But there's a bird. How did it survive? Then
Right.
I saw our laundry on the line and was completely shredded by shrapnel. And I got uh, kind of outraged by that. How could they
Yeah.
do that to our laundry?
Right.
So I noticed that these distractions, these things were distractions that tended to bring me out of that pure, clear state which I now felt was just a state of being, just simply, directly, purely being. Uncomplicated, but absolutely real. And so these distractions pulled my mind to them and pulled me out of that state little by little. And I determined then that I'm going to dedicate myself, even if it had to be the rest of my life, to be in that state.
Oh my God, that is an amazing story.
So then I began focusing the mind, to be present. And I put myself through disciplines. I would spend hours a day getting my mind to be focused on a point. And I created techniques for myself that would work because I could see this works, this doesn't work.
Right. You can feel that.
Yeah. And so I had to get stuff that was guaranteed to work because this was the most important thing in my whole life. Not what I did, not all the distractions, but to experience being me, So that's how I got started. And I spent the rest of my life on it. And eventually, when I came to the Himalayas and met these two luminous sages, they were amazed that I knew all of this and had all of these techniques because they got it from the scriptures like the Upanishad, the ancient seers' writings. But they were fascinated by my ways and had me teach among them because of that.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even happen to other Indian people. You have to be up there. And Western people, they usually don't want to have involved at all because it started with the Beatles and then the hippies who came there naked and saying, this is how you should do it,
Right.
This is how to be free.
Right. So, I mean, this is just so, to me, and you talk about techniques and what the self-discipline and these things that you taught yourself, especially at the age of 5, right? What you went through and the just how, like, just seeing all of that and the trauma of that and experiencing that, but then having this awareness, but this desire to get back to that state of I am, right? And the peripheral, right? Everything that's around you that's causing the distraction, and having the knowledge or even the understanding to do that at age 5, because I'm thinking about my experience. And I was probably in my mid 30s when I got to that point where I realized I didn't have to live this way anymore, right? I didn't have to live this suffering, self-suffering. I call it like self-terrorizing, right? It was terrorizing myself with my thoughts.
And terrorizing and depriving.
Right. Yes. And when I changed my life, it was about 5 years ago now. I was at a point where I was you often hear people say that, it's hitting rock bottom or having some sort of, there's some catalyst that gets you to want to make this change, right? Yeah. And for me, I was living a life that was just not me. It was not for me. I was, in a job I didn't like. I was in a relationship that was going nowhere, all of these things, and I'd had enough. And when I decided to take my own power back and take my control of my mind, I would drive to work. Back then I was in a job where I went to an office, and I would drive to work every day, and it would start this argument in my mind. I was arguing with myself about, can I have this life that I want, right? Can I change my life? Like, do I do these things that I'm terrorizing myself with? Can I make this stop? Because I was sick of the pain. I was so sick of the pain. And so talking about that, about making a lifelong commitment to that and having that self-discipline. Again, I keep saying at the age of 5, which is just amazing to me, because I knew what it took for me to, and it's not for me at least, and not everybody's experience would be the same, but it's very, the hardest obstacle I had was myself in this, because I wanted to fight myself on it, or I wanted to almost not allow myself to have it, like you mentioned, and I guess, I don't know, is that a normal thing for people? Is that why we don't do these things?
Well, Sloane, you're saying so many things that I wanted to respond to. So to your last point, you are your best friend and your worst enemy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And your best friend is when you listen to yourself, when you're in touch with yourself, when you really value yourself sufficiently to start paying attention to
Yeah.
yourself. Do you
Yeah.
understand? The
I do.
opposite is giving everything of you, all of your attention, all of your mind, and even your action to the demands and distractions that take you away from your own life.
Yeah.
So you talk about catalyst. Uh, to me, what I discovered, you could say, well, okay, that was a real great privilege to grow up with death. But so I learned to see death as a really valued friend, a
Yeah.
real teacher, because you know why? Most of us respond only to crisis,
Right.
with change.
Which is
And
exactly my story. Yes. Mm-hmm.
the ultimate crisis is the knowledge that we're all going to get taken by death.
Mm-hmm.
And
True.
therefore, I feel so privileged to have this death is like is my friend, my best friend, that I look forward and have been with throughout my life, but has made my life so much more alive and joyous and luminous,
Yes. That's
So,
so fascinating to me because
yeah,
that's in your book. Your book is called A Dialogue with Death, the Teacher of Life.
yeah.
And so, again, I have so many questions and so many, I think we could talk for
But
hours about this.
let me just tell you, so you mentioned with that a catalyst, right?
Yeah.
Before when you talk. Um, so I did those practices after my 5.5
Yes.
years, that first
Yes.
experience. And when I was about 7, all of a sudden, in a quiet evening, after having done all these practices for at least a year and a half or so, all of a sudden, the luminosity just went through me again. It was just totally just luminosity.
What
And
do you mean by luminosity?
everything was light, everything was knowing, and the kind of knowing that comforts you. This is why I am,
Ah,
because that a fundamental question comes up: why am I alive? To me, it
right.
was, why am I still alive?
Right.
You know?
Right. No, yes, that question I've asked often, honestly, recently after what we experienced in 2020. And we were talking about this briefly before the show about, um, seeking answers and also, do I still believe the things that I used to believe? These
Yeah.
principles that I held true about myself and my beliefs and how my thoughts create my reality. And in my struggle with that, how
Okay.
do I,
But you know what I say to that? Don't believe. Know.
yeah,
Know through real experience.
yeah.
And then you can be in reality. There is no your reality. There's no my reality, because if reality were dependent upon us, it would be opinions, it would be belief systems, it would be likes and dislikes, not a reality that is a fundamental foundation of all that is. Reality is what is. Reality is what is, irrespective of likes or dislikes, opinions, prejudices, or whatever.
So that is also really interesting. So reality is what is, but then shaped by our perception, then how we view
No,
it.
no. Reality is what is. Now, the way we can perceive it can be either real or false, or degrees in between. It can often be discolored by our likes and dislikes, or
Right.
our prejudices, our
Yes.
opinions. But when we live that, then we don't live what is. And then it's like we're slogging around in the dark murkiness and living by illusions, living by falsity.
Yeah.
That does not satisfy.
Right.
After all my travels through all those years on foot, living with these people, all over the world, well, many parts of the world, I've come back here and I've always read people's energy, right?
Right.
Even walking on the street and so on. And I've been in some of the nations where, just some lentils and rice and a piece of flat bread is what you get all day, and you're lucky if you get that. So they're impoverished. They don't even have refrigerators and so in many parts of the world. And they work like 12 hours a day and are happy to have a handful of rice at the end of the day. So we come back here where people are enormously privileged. Even the so-called poor people here
Right.
are enormously privileged. But you walk through the streets, what do you see? Joy, openness, and so on that I see in those countries? No.
Yeah.
Depression, anger, closedness, separation, isolation.
Yes.
And all of those things are forms of suffering.
I totally agree with that. And again, for me, I go back to my own participation in that. And when I changed my life, I decided not to participate in that suffering anymore. And I wanted to change. And then but then I go back, and then I felt like I got comfortable. I got comfortable and I let some old beliefs slide back in.
We can do that. We can
Mm-hmm.
fool ourselves being comfortable in a pile of murk, a hole of murk that eventually will suck us in.
Yeah.
We can fool ourselves. But one of your themes is freedom, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What is the main thing about freedom that you're interested in?
Well, I talk a lot about on the show again about living free in what feels like an unfree world. And to
Okay.
me,
So the unfree world, okay, the world is real and unreal according to what we do with it, right? But so there is the real world, there's the reality, but we're unfree because of what we insist on doing with it. We insist on living in opposition to what is so.
right.
Even in opposition to what we are.
Yes,
You ask your neighbor and say, look, really now, look him in the eye, really now, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
You know what the response you usually get is, are you okay? What's the matter with you? What kind of question is that?
What do you mean, who am I? Yeah.
I asked that I did a talk to about 500 business executives. I asked them to turn to their neighbor and describe the identity of their typical client. And the hall was filled with noise, everybody talking.
Mm-hmm.
Then we put an end to that. And then I said, okay, now turn to the other neighbor and describe your personal identity. Do you know what the sound was in the hall?
Silence.
The sound of silence.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
didn't know. So I said, how can you aim to be successful when you don't even know the foundation of everything that you have in relationship to your work and your clients when you're not in touch with that foundation?
Right.
So it has to be superficial. How can that be successful? And even though people think sometimes they're successful because they're millionaires, deep down they're suffering if they haven't taken care of that fundamental.
Right. And you talk about
if they're successful as a millionaire while having taken care of the relationship with themselves and know who they are and then function as who they are in being a millionaire, then they're really successful.
right.
But they're also very rare.
And you talk about superficial, and that was for me one of the things over the past year and a half that veil came down for me in a lot of ways, and a lot of people I talked to as well, that these things that I used to think I had to have, or these things that I used to think I needed to do, all that fell away. And a lot of this stuff is can be hard to face. It can be hard to, especially I think in the way we faced it, very abruptly and sharp, and very much you're forced to face. Well, you're not forced. Nobody's forced to do anything. But if you want to, change, if you want to be able to understand yourself and some of the things that we're talking about, move out of this self-suffering. I'll just summarize it as that. And then we start seeking answers, right? We're in this place of these things have happened now, and now I'm seeking answers.
Well,
And
I can tell you about that because you can seek answers, but first of all, where do you seek answers?
very good question. And that's almost what I always felt like. I'm always seeking, right? I have this antenna on, like trying to seek.
While you're seeking, you have to be aware that there are two things going on. There's the sincere drive within to come in touch with your real being, to be fulfilled. That is common to every form of being.
Right.
Okay? But most people have lived in opposition to that. All of their thinking, feeling, emotions, and so on are geared towards that way of life and towards that suffering, okay? The consequent suffering. And so they will hold on to that. They will stay attached to that. And even though they are seeking and might even find real answers, they will often deny the real answers that they have experienced to be true in order to stay with the familiar suffering.
Yes.
I've even had it at a retreat here, a woman who said, you know, I'm a nurse in a hospital. I see a lot of suffering. I do a lot of suffering. But she says, everything that I learned here today is true. I know it to be true,
Mm-hmm.
and it would relieve my suffering. And you know what? I'm not going to do it because I'm used to suffering. I'm good at it.
Oh my gosh. The
And
suffering is familiar and comfortable, like you said.
yeah, but it's not comfortable.
Well,
The comfort
right.
is an illusion. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like a Kafka-esque attachment to being picked apart by the suffering into little chunks of nothingness, you know?
Yes. Yes. I very well. I know it very well. And, that was another reason why I even started this podcast, was to be able to talk about these things, provide different perspectives, and offer solutions. And I think what you said about, because that the words matter, right? The choice of words we matter. Like we talked about earlier, I am. Whatever comes after I am is very important. So if you're constantly saying negative things after the I am, that's the
Yeah.
energy you take
Well,
on.
so you touched upon, okay, what do we do, right?
Yeah.
Uh, it doesn't happen by itself. It doesn't happen by you singing in a room and hoping and thinking and so on and so on.
Right.
Not even by reading a lot of books, you know. It happens by okay, what do you do if you really, become a brain surgeon, you don't just pick up a sharp knife and say,
Right.
I'm going to practice now, become a brain surgeon. No, you go to the top authorities and become a student, right? And you're shown the step-by-step moves to make to successfully do your actions, right? So what we're talking about is becoming true to yourself and overcoming that destructive attachment to suffering. It takes a lot of special knowledge, and that knowledge only comes from direct experience.
Right.
Well, even in my dialogue with death, I'm at the very beginning, I say to the student, to the reader, read this not just like you read a regular book and read on with your mind, but get yourself in the state of focus that we were talking about before.
Right. At the beginning.
And every chapter I proceed by establishing that focus with them again,
Mm-hmm.
so that they stay in that as an experience. And when they get through, if they've really done it that way, the lights turn on.
Right.
You become free. You can become empowered. And then you know that you have the joy and the comfort and security that you've always been yearning for.
Mm-hmm.
You know you have it and you will live it.
What I love about the book, what you say about it also, is that you wrote it to offer the highest experiences of the being that you are, and to help you realize answers to the most pressing and fascinating questions of human life. So, which we talked about, in that seeking mode, and feeling, at least for me, that's been my experience. But then you also go on to say, this book is not for the ordinary person. and everyone should read it, for it challenges even those who think little of themselves to rise up to the level of perception that frees them from ignorance and the consequence of suffering.
That's good, isn't it? That's
Yes.
good.
The first time when I read that, it actually gave me chills, because it's like we talked about at the beginning, what we're saying isn't hard. It's not unattainable. It's none of these things that maybe people might be feeling listening to us talk, or maybe have been told before, or maybe have even experienced when they tried something that somebody told them would work but didn't
Yeah.
work. Um,
Sloane, you're saying a very important thing there, that it is attainable because it's all about you, the
right.
real you, and there's something in you that reverberates to even what we're talking about now. If
Right.
you're present, something in you will say yes, yes.
And so tell us a little bit more about the book. As you mentioned, it progressively takes the reader through it. It's called A
Right.
Dialogue with Death, and death has been a great friend and teacher for you.
Yeah.
For me, not so much. I think it's been something I've feared, and especially feared of those around me.
Well, okay. You said a very important word, progressively. The book works progressively. So it's presented as a story. Okay. There's a young man who watches his father give sacrifice, but he sees that he sacrifices barren cows and stuff from home that he doesn't want anymore. And he sees the insincerity of that sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
The father does it not knowing that he's acting insincerely, but the son, who as a teenager is highly evolved, says to his father, Papa, what you're doing is not real. And the father, don't go away,
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes back the second time, tells him, Father, what you're doing is not real. Get away. And the third time, the father is getting really impatient. This is like, go to hell. Except he says, go to death. And the son says, well, the word of my father needs to be honored. So he, in order to save his father, he sincerely goes to the abode, to the house of death. And so when he gets there, unfortunately, death is not home. He's out on an errand. So his wives make him welcome to stay and wait. And then he waits for 3 days. And then death comes and it says, oh my, I have an honored guest in my house, and I have not done the things that are expected to honor a guest, like to give him food and drink and wash his feet from traveling and so on. So he says to the young man, I owe you 3 big boons, 3 gifts. You can ask of me anything that you want, which is sort of like the story of the genie coming out of the bottle and giving you 3 wishes, right? So this young man, being very smart, he asked for the most important things that could be. And then in the process, death constantly, so this is verbal, right? So in the process, the young man asks the first boon, and then death challenges him because he has to make sure that the young man is ready to receive this luminous wisdom, because if he's not ready, it's going to be harmful to him.
Right.
So he engages him in a dialogue. Death engages the boy in a dialogue by which the boy can earn that reward. So that's the book, and it goes from a first step where the young man wants to have his father taken care of, which then stands, you need to interpret it, it stands for familial things to be taken care of. His relationship not only with his father, but also with his family, but also with his community, but also with his society and with humanity. All of that he wants to have taken care of as a first step, so that he relates successfully and truly with all of those levels of relationship. And then he goes into higher things, more and more sophisticated, more and more subtle, and more challenged by death, who eventually offers him, look, don't ask me that question. Instead, I'm going to give you great lands for you to rule over. And then later on, he promises your whole family, you will have many sons and daughters, and they will all live over, including you, over 100 years, with all of their capabilities present, and so on and on. Death tries to bribe him, and the young man says, no, I want what's most important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I said in my life. It's like, we were deprived, we were starving for years, and we had a lot of suffering behind us. And I always said to myself, that's okay, I'm going to go what is the very highest. That's what I'm going to go for. I'm not going to go for momentary thrills. That's not going to be my occupation. So, I mean, I did go on and lead a so-called normal life, but always with that going on inside of me.
Right.
And then even when I came to this country, I couldn't speak English, so I had to overcome all of that. And then I eventually became, like you mentioned, a very successful architect, which I invested a lot in, going to school and all that. But all the time that was in my mind. Then when I had really come after all of that investment to success in architecture, I said to myself, there was a building I had designed in Manhattan, which is very rare for a young architect. And then Mayor Lindsay had my drawings on television and said, this is going to be a jewel of Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to myself, that's not what my life is for.
Yeah.
And as the moment I had that recognition, I decided to live my life now purely focused on what my life is for. Now, I'm not saying that you all need to do that, leave everything behind.
Right.
No, you can do it while you're still focused on the quest to be real and in touch with yourself. You can do it while you're in touch with yourself and do it so much better and more successful. But that's when I took off for 4 years to wander around the world, to share the knowledge I had developed and compare it to what other cultures develop and see the similarity, the current of reality that's there for all of us, no matter what language, what culture, what age we are.
Yeah, and hearing you talk about that with it, it's like I think of it as it's your operating system, right? If we think about a computer, the system that's running that state of being that you chose to be in and to use, is your decided for yourself. Again, decided, you were intentional doing these things and having it be, that's what's running in the background instead of some of the things, that we've mentioned, like the suffering and the terrorizing ourselves with our thoughts, in things.
Right.
This is, and again, this topic of, this is such a big topic, and I'll link in the show notes to your book and as well where everybody can find out more about you. But before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you a couple more questions. We talked about living free in what feels like in an unfree world, and in this inner work, as we talked about, it is attainable. I want everybody listening to know that this is attainable. This hopefully is maybe a catalyst, or gets somebody who is slightly interested in this, gives them a starting point, a place to start with to explore this. But in your experience over the years, and your personal experience as well, for people who've been willing to really step up and do this inner work to gain a better understanding of themselves, what have you seen, or what have you what sometimes I know in my own life it feels scary to maybe go a different way than we're feeling, than we're used to doing. So what have you seen in your experience when people are willing to do this type of work?
Well, could I just read you something that's at the very ending of the book?
Sure. Yes, please do.
It's called, that chapter is called The End Beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You are deeply and truly blessed. Be aware of that. You are blessed for the light that radiates within you and is your very essence, the source of you, that which you are. You have spent long time evolving to this point of being a human being.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like most of us believe in evolution, and evolution takes place from a lower level of being to a higher level of being. And as a human being, with all of the instruments we have, our mind, feelings, emotion, and so on, we're capable of the very highest experience, the highest perception. We've evolved to that, you know, and in which you can fulfill and realize the full potential of the being that you are and no longer dwell in unconsciousness. Unconsciousness is the non-experience of the being that you are.
Yeah. Say that again. The unconsciousness
Unconsciousness is the non-experience of the
non-experience.
being that you are.
Yeah.
Wherein comes isolation. You know what the greatest punishment is for people in jail? Isolation. They
Yeah.
get thrown into isolation.
Yeah.
Most people here live in isolation. That's why they are so suffering with pain and loneliness.
Yeah.
And
Yes. Oh yeah.
displacement. I don't even belong here. I don't know what I'm doing here, and so on.
Yes.
You know, but you're so blessed. You don't have to have that. In this lifetime, you have in your grasp the opportunity to never die to your own perception of being you, to dwell consciously in the experience of yourself continuously. Allow yourself to savor joyously and blissfully the gift of light, the light that dwells within you, the light of consciousness, of knowing who you are, by which you have the power to share this luminosity and radiate into the apparent darkness and warm the hearts of fellow beings. That is a task that we hear about many, many times nowadays, is to give to others, to give to the interconnected wholeness of us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have that opportunity, we have that privilege, and that living that is our liberation and our continuous joy.
Such an amazing story you have. This topic again is just fascinating to me. I'm so glad that you came to the show this week. My guest this week has been Erhard Vogel, author of A Dialogue with Death, the Teacher of Life. And as we wrap up today, so thinking about all the things that we've talked about today, what is one piece of advice you would give the listeners to get them started on their path of self-discovery?
I mentioned it already before. Value yourself sufficiently to become attentive to yourself, to care for yourself,
Yeah.
to be with yourself, and become an expert at being you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Not an expert at plumbing or expert at brain surgery or expert at being housemaker or something, an expert at being you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what I teach, the step-by-step experiences that make that attainable to anybody who
Yes.
sincerely wants to value themselves sufficiently. You got to put in the work, you got to put in the attention, but that's not work.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And it's worth it, right? It's worth, this is, we talk about again, the questions and
this is what everything about every one of us is constantly yearning for and driving towards.
right.
And the only reason we haven't attained it yet is because we've stepped into the way of it over and over again, put our energies into that keeps us deprived and empty and frustrated.
Yeah. And in that state of suffering. Well, we could go on for hours, I'm sure. But Erhard, thank you so much for being with us this week. Can you tell the listeners how they can find out a little bit more about you? And also, you have an upcoming event in November. I would love for you to share with the listeners.
Okay, well, I guess they can get in contact with us on the internet, Facebook, Google. They can call the Nataraja Meditation and Yoga Center, get direct contact, get good help, And on November 1st, we have an unusual event in as much as we let guests come to our concluding class of a meditation series.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation, again, is just being with yourself, focused and real. So a concluding class that celebrates their graduation from that segment. And I will talk to people on a introductory level,
Mm-hmm.
so that they know what we're talking about and can experience how it works.
Amazing. I will link to all that in the show notes. I'll have all the information in there, so please be sure and check that out. Again, Erhard, I feel like my life is changed in a positive way from our conversation today. Some of the things we talked about, which again was one of my intentions to clarify some things with myself, and you really helped me do that. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sloane, Freemont. One piece of advice I have for you:
Yes,
read the book.
it's on my list. It's on my list.
The questions you ask are terrific. You're right on the track.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback too.
Okay,
And thank you all for listening this week on the Create What You Speak podcast. Make sure to visit sloanefremont.com where you can subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, I'd appreciate a positive rating on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. And one last thing, remember to check out the Create What You Speak Academy at createwhatyouspeak.com. Thanks for listening this week, and be sure to tune in next week where I will continue to give you real life solutions to help you live free in an unfree world.
Great.